Welcome to the Awe and Wonder podcast. I'm Sarah Kinsella.
And I'm Brenda Del Monte.
We're in our 9th series, and we're talking about neurodiversity in education and in life. And today we're so excited to have our guest with us today, who is Sara Ayars. And we wanted to have Sara on for a few reasons. I mean, personally, Brenda and I might be a little biased because we love Sara. We work with Sara at the Special Ed Tech Center. And she's amazing, but she also comes to this space with a personal experience, being a mom. And so in addition to a lot of work she's done learning about neurodiversity for her job, she's going to talk a lot about how it also intersects with her personal experiences. So Sara, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yay. So Sara, we know you from Special Ed Tech Center, but why don't you give us your full bio? What else do you do? You're a busy lady.
Absolutely. I'm a speech-language pathologist and assistive technology specialist. I have been in the field for about 18 years, and I spent the majority of my career in the public school system. I really love that setting because it's so functional, and I love the multidisciplinary nature of the work that is in that setting. But at this current moment, I have two primary jobs. I work for Special Ed Tech Center with you all, where I get to lead professional development and coach and train educators, among many other things. And then I work as a clinical educator and adjunct faculty member at Western Washington University. Having said all of that, what I really love doing is walking alongside teams to build systems where every student can participate meaningfully. I'm really passionate about creating spaces where there's connection and collaboration and curiosity that leads the way. As you mentioned, part of the reason I'm here today is also because of that intersectionality between my professional and my personal life. So I'll share some of my personal background as well. I'm a wife. I've been married to my husband, Drew, for 14 years now. We have two kids, one who's 12 and one who's 9. One of my children is ADHD, meaning that they are autistic and have ADHD. Also with ARFID, which is avoidant restricted food intake disorder and anxiety. And then my other child has ADHD and anxiety. And I just got my own ADHD diagnosis a few months back. So we are one big, happy, neurodivergent family.
I love that, Sara. And I also love that span, right? It's your kids and then you, and how sometimes researching these things for our own children makes us reflect on ourselves, or maybe if we're working in that space with kids, a lot of us are doing that and we think, wait a minute, this seems like my own child. So we're excited to dive into that piece of it. But let's zoom out a little bit because we're talking about neurodiversity in today and in this whole series. But we wanted to find out, what does neurodiversity mean to you? How would you define it, personally or professionally?
So the term neurodiversity was actually originally coined by a sociologist named Judy Singer in the 1990s, but it refers to the diversity of human minds, kind of similar to biodiversity in nature. So it's this concept or idea that differences in human brain function and development are natural variations and they're not deficits or diseases. There's no single quote unquote right way for a brain to work, but instead it's about embracing different ways of thinking and learning and perceiving the world. So really it's a framework for inclusion, which helps to reduce stigma. And it focuses on recognizing the strengths of individuals and their unique perspectives and really specialized skills of neurodivergent people rather than focusing on their challenges.
So if the definition is that we all process differently, isn't everybody neurodivergent?
So that's a really good clarifying question. Everybody is neurodiverse, meaning that we all are different from each other, but a neurodivergent person is someone who differs from what society deems is the norm or neurotypical.
Okay. So it's not just I'm quirky. And you know how it's a buzzword sometimes when people are self-diagnosing themselves as that because, and maybe they're correct. Maybe they finally have vocabulary around the way they felt their whole lives. But it's not that just because you have a thought here and there that's not norm. It's a little bit more um, systemic, yes?
Yeah. hmm It is definitely more of how does this person's brain work in
Hmm.
general, as opposed to what's this one thought or belief.
Right. So how does it learn? How does it process language? How does it express
Mhm.
language? How does this person interpret their world? And in what chunks of information can they tolerate? Right. There's a lot of pieces to that.
Exactly. And I would add to that sensory differences too. So,
Mhm.
how does your body react to the environment that it's in? There's lots of ways that we are all different from each other.
Mhm.
But as I mentioned before, that idea of being neurotypical means that in general, there's a group of people in society that are more like each other
Right.
than other people.
I see.
That's that's really helpful framing to think of it. And it's not just one diagnosis, right? It's not just one profile. There are many different ways that someone may be neurodivergent. And it's interesting because when you were talking about that definition, it reminded me of an SLP who we all three know, Barb Lark. I think I've shared this with you, Sarah, before that when she was working in the school district, her school was having a um, cultural diversity evening type of thing, like multicultural thing. And she was thinking of neurodiversity as like a culture, like part of someone's who they are and how they identify, right? And so she had
Mhm.
her room was the neurodivergent space, and people could come and learn
Um,
about it.
I
But
love that.
yeah, that definition you gave kind of reminded me of that because
mhm.
it's embracing it too, right? It's not saying it's wrong or right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm going to talk more about my kids in a bit, but I do think the idea of it being a culture is really important. And to Brenda's earlier point, too, about the idea of self identification and belonging, especially for these people who may have just thought they were quirky before.
Mhm.
So getting that, whether it's a self diagnosis or an actual diagnostic label, can help people find that culture, that identity.
Mm.
So what does the diagnostic look like?
For to qualify as neurodivergent,
Yeah.
it's an umbrella term. And so I think often when I hear people refer to that term, they're speaking about being autistic or ADHD, but anxiety lives under that umbrella, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, trauma, and PTSD is sometimes under that umbrella. So it depends who you talk to, but there are many different diagnostic labels that can fit under that umbrella term.
And what professionals are doing those kinds of evaluated services?
I know from my own personal experience that in order to get a diagnosis for your child, you often can get it through a pediatrician, especially if it's the ADHD diagnosis.
Mhm.
But it's really more a comprehensive evaluation done by a neuropsychiatrist or psychologist who would give you a diagnosis of autism, let's say. But for example, I mentioned avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, ARFID, that can be diagnosed by a nutritionist. So there are many different people, but I would say primarily it would be a pediatrician or a neuropsych.
Okay.
So Sarah, I often will go to you or reference things you've done when I want to learn about neurodiversity affirming practices. And so I want to hear a little bit more about that from you, because I know you've done a lot of work there. So what does that look like, either professionally or in your personal life with your children?
I can talk a lot about this, as you know. I think in general, it being neurodiversity affirming means that you are striving to accept and celebrate the neurological differences like autism or ADHD as that natural variation of the human brain rather than being a deficit to be cured. But this idea of being neurodiversity affirming is really an anchor for me personally in my everyday life, both professionally and personally. So professionally, really in the past 5 to 10 years, I've shifted from considering myself even as a pathologist or even a therapist to being more of a collaborator and a partner with my students and clients and their families. So whether I'm coaching other educators or I'm leading professional development or in sessions with students myself, I emphasize practice that it is child-led and strengths-based and really responsive to the person, the human that is in front of you in that moment. I value connection over compliance. So what that means is that in moments of dysregulation, I'm going to focus less on ensuring that that student is compliant from a behavioral perspective and instead focus more on co-regulation and connection. And so overall, professionally, I'm trying to recognize that when it comes to differences in the way that we communicate or the way that we approach the world, I'm not trying to fix someone, but rather work alongside them to support them with what is meaningful and important in their own lives.
Sarah, I'm going to ask you because not everybody might know what co-regulation is. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so co-regulation is when you typically, as the adult or communication partner, use your own regulation to help the other person that you're with come back to a more regulated state. So that can be in a professional setting, maybe sitting with someone. If, let's say, they use an augmentative communication device, you might be potentially modeling if they're in a space where they can hear that, or you might just be sitting and being quiet with them and really, again, just using your own regulation to bring the other person to a state of regulation as well.
And so maybe like joining a student on the floor if that's where they are, right? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I also apply this in my everyday life with my kids as well. So I really try to have a neurodiversity-affirming home life, which means that I take kind of a similar approach to what I do professionally, but at home personally. So I focus on my kids' strengths and I try to support their individual autonomy. And I adapt my home environment to meet their sensory needs. My kids are really they can be really emotionally intense and they are sensitive. They are gifted or sometimes called 2E. So they really benefit from focus on collaboration between myself and them and supporting their autonomy and reducing unnecessary stresses or demands, among other things. So there are specific ways that this might look at home. One is a focus on relationship building. So I want my kids to know that I am someone that they can trust, like no matter what. I'm not a friend. I'm still a parent, but I very much value connection and I hold space daily for conversations and connection. It also looks like lower demands. So one of my kids in particular has what I would call a pervasive drive for autonomy. And sometimes, especially days when at school, maybe they had a really overwhelming, very demand heavy day, then even telling them something that I think is very simple, like it's time to brush your teeth or it's time to eat dinner, that can feel like a demand. So I really try to shift my language and I offer choices and really try to find ways to preserve their autonomy.
And then I have to ask you, Sarah, because as a mom, that is not easy to do all the time.
It's not.
I'm thinking about it and I'm like, oh man, okay. So, I mean, do you have to have like sticky notes with the wording up sometimes or reminders? How do you, like day to day, how do you really do that?
Yeah, it took a lot of practice and a lot of personal growth. It took a shift in my own thinking too. So it actually ties into the idea of universal design for learning, which is something we talk about professionally. And I apply that to my home life. So, for example, if I know that a certain time of day is really challenging, like for one of my kids, dinner time is very challenging for them. So I'll ask myself, what is my goal for this activity? And it might be social communication and family bonding, right? I want us all to be together and talk about our day. And if that's my goal, then I'm going to encourage my kids to come to the dinner table and be present. And they can choose whether they eat or not. But again, I have to try really hard to focus less on what they're eating and more on, okay, I told myself the goal here is social connection, and that's what we're doing. But if my goal is that they eat enough to be full and have a nutritious meal, then I might give them the option, do you want to eat with the family, or would you like to eat in your room? And if they want to choose to eat in their room, then that's okay. And sometimes eating alone in a quiet room while they listen to their music or whatever they're doing will mean that they are going to eat a really good meal. So I'd say, yes, sticky notes, it takes practice. At one point, I actually even had a little log in my phone where I would just journal. And this was a recommendation to me from a therapist. I didn't come up with this on my own, but I would journal after meals, like, how did it feel to not comment on intake and food and all of that? And I would just write one line, like, that was really hard, like, gosh, I really wanted to say something. And after about a month of doing that, I found that it was a lot easier.
I love that idea.
So essentially what you're saying is like not picking a battle, right?
Exactly.
And so when you stop and slow down and say, what's my goal and what's best for all of us right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not because what might be best for one kid might not be better, the same for the other kid, right? We know that with all of our children. But it's about not getting into a power struggle because that's
Exactly.
where the pervasiveness comes in and they're not going to let it go. And
Exactly.
if they come from you, you're not letting them go either. You know what I mean? So what happens when you find yourself in that loop, though? When you're like, oh, we're head to head now. Because I think what happens is when you're head to head, the adult comes back to, it's my way or the highway. This is my house, or this is my rules, or this is my classroom. So when you realize that you're up against up and a brick wall in that way, what is the strategy to diffuse the situation?
It's a good question. I think the first thing I try and say to myself is pause. So I calm myself, going back to that idea of co-regulation. I notice my child is starting to become dysregulated. If I feel myself getting dysregulated too, then we are just going to spiral out
Yeah.
of control here. So I try and tell myself to pause, take some breaths, and sometimes that means walking away. And you know what? Like, this is my life. And so I'm not always perfect at this.
Mhm.
And what I have learned through all this is the greatest thing that I can do as a parent is repair. So even if I do get dysregulated, which happens, maybe I yell, maybe I say something I didn't mean to, maybe I try, say something like, it's my way or the highway.
Mhm.
What I will do later is, once I've calmed down and regulated myself, I will go back to my child and I will say, that was a really hard time. I realized that I did X, Y, and Z. I want to apologize and say, I'm sorry. This is why I'm sorry. And next time I'm going to try and do this. So I think that moment of repair has shown my kids that it's okay to apologize,
Mhm.
that nobody is perfect,
Mhm.
and that they don't have to remember that moment in the same way forever, because we are going back to that moment and changing it together.
Mhm.
I love
Mhm.
that. And
Yeah.
I must be in the space where I'm needing a lot of reminders because I'm picturing what you just said, like pausing, saying that was a really hard time and apologizing. I'm like, I think you could like bullet point that and I'm going to put it on the wall somewhere. Um, 'Cause it's like you kind of need a script. Sometimes, you need something to come naturally, like quickly or to think about. It's like I need a little script sometimes. And I love
Yeah,
that. I love the way you said that. And
it's hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know you've talked about like with one of your kids, just the way you say something can be kind of a trigger. But also
Mhm.
you've talked about like rephrasing for your child, like your example of it's time to brush your teeth, right? You
Mhm.
might say it in a different way that it feels a little less like a demand. Is that
Absolutely.
something you've had to do or you've figured out?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I've figured it out completely. So, what you're alluding to is this idea of what's called declarative language. And there is a book on it. So, if anyone's interested, there's a book called the Declarative Language Handbook. And like I said, I'm still learning, but it is all about phrasing things in a way where it doesn't feel like the demand. So with using the toothbrushing example, it might be like, ooh, you just ate a bunch of popcorn. Like, do you have kernels stuck in your braces? Ooh, what should we do? And then encouraging them to say, oh, it's time to go brush my teeth. Or sometimes it's as simple as offering choices. I know I did it a lot when they were little. As they get older, they're super smart and they're like, Mom, you're just trying to get me to do something I don't want to do. Right. So it's
Mm-hmm.
being more strategic about the choices. And that might be like, hey, do you want to brush your teeth now or do you want to finish playing that game you're playing? I'll set a timer for a minute. And then when the timer beeps, hopefully you'll be done with the game and we'll brush your teeth. You can choose. Do you want to do it now or when the timer beeps? So it might be offering a choice like that, that again feels age respectful. Or this, might sound a little bit gross, but sometimes if the day is really hard, I'll just say, hey, it's okay. Like, just get brushing your teeth. If that's too much for tonight, it is okay. Just brush really well tomorrow. And sometimes that just has to be it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
love that.
I used to call folding laundry a folding party, and it didn't take very long before they realized this is not a party. So the other thing is once they catch on to your strategy, you got to shake it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Always. It's all about shaking things up because being ADHDers, we thrive on novelty, right? So like it can't always be like, do you want this toothbrush or this toothbrush? It's got to be, one day it's which toothbrush do you want? The next day it's like, hey, do you want mint or bubblegum flavor? The next day it's, do you want to brush it upstairs or downstairs? It's always finding new ways, which can be extremely exhausting. But
Would you say
when
that,
I'm in the headspace for it, it does work.
sorry, would you say that that's why sometimes social stories work really well and sometimes they don't? When a social story has no novelty, we do see that some kids are not interested in that. Other kids love the predictability of it, and they're going to go and use echolalia and everything, and use the script from the social story, and it's gonna regulate them to do something, or to stay on task, or to complete something. But I would say there's a subset of kids who they don't want to do the same thing twice, and so it's like it just came to mind that that's why potentially why some social stories are more effective than others. And it's almost like, does your social story embed choose your own adventure? Like, I don't know if you guys remember those from when you were a kid, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like, go to this for, is he gonna, run in the forest, go to page 9? Is he gonna jump in the ocean, go to page 7? And it's almost like you need a little bit of like, every social story embeds some choice so that a new story can be told.
I love that. Or even how would you choose this ending? Letting them
Mhm.
have some autonomy in there too.
Mm-hmm.
And with a diagnostic label like autism, for example, people think that certain strategies will always work, like social
Mhm.
stories will always help. But it really depends on that person. And when you have that flavor of ADHD mixed in there, then like my child who has both, needs that novelty too. So
Mhm.
yes, things need to be predictable and we need to have routines and schedules and visuals and whatnot, but we also need the novelty built in too.
That's
But
true.
so let's talk about that, because let's say you're a classroom teacher and you it doesn't feel like you can make all of these adjustments for all of your kids' different learning styles and different ways they're processing and different lengths of time that they can sit. And it just seems like it's a tall order to be a teacher in general. And then work has to be done. So it's like, how do we educate kids without the kind of triggering that demand avoidance piece?
You just like hit the nail on the head with the question that has been rattling around in my brain for the last couple of months is if I were to design a neurodiversity affirming school, and especially a school that supports this need for autonomy, what would my school look like?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I haven't come to the answer for that quite yet, but I think that it starts with making certain shifts. So overall, I would recommend using the universal design for learning approach, right? Where you're building in options and choice,
Mm-hmm.
where our goal is this. but you can do it this way or you can do it this way. So building in those options for choice.
So, for example, for those who might not be familiar with it, so it could be like your goal is to tell this certain story. You can write it, you could type it, you could do it as a podcast. Is that
Exactly,
okay?
exactly. But writing the story doesn't necessarily mean you have to hand write out an entire 10-page story, right? So, like, what is my goal? And in the same way that I spoke about the dinner time, looking at classroom in that same way, what is the goal of this individual activity? What are different ways that students can meet that goal, including technology that they can use to help them meet that goal? But I'd say overall, I would also design an environment that really reduces the need for compliance. So instead of building systems that require obedience, we build systems that support success. So predictable routines, visual supports, access to AAC without gatekeeping, built-in regulation options, genuine choice making opportunities, tasks that are cognitively respectful and developmentally aligned. So if we build the environment in this way that's inclusive by design, we would, in theory, have less of a need then for behavior management.
That's interesting to think about all those. I mean, you list those things off so smoothly, right? But really, each one of those requires a lot of work. It can definitely be done, but it requires some explicit work on the teacher and the adults in the room. Um, and I was thinking about when you were saying that, like a visual schedule, you said you still need visuals and things. And I was thinking about a classroom that I was in, and each student had their own visual schedule, and it aligned with the class's visual schedule. But I think sometimes, even within the things that we're doing, we sometimes still get a little rigid. Like they're moving the thing over, and you're like, nope, that's not done yet, or we haven't done that. Um, so I don't know, what advice or what thoughts do you have around keeping flexible ourselves?
I mean, I think it takes time and practice. We can't expect that we're going to be that way from the get-go. And really, Sarah has heard me say this a million times, but I always talk about starting small and, going with the goers. So really, if you're looking at your classroom environment, you don't have to change everything all at once. Pick one thing, start small, see success, and you'll probably notice that you are already doing some things that you could just expand or embellish in different ways.
I love that idea. And go with the goers. Like you might have a para-educator in your classroom who's like ready to help you start this journey, right? Or the librarian.
Well, and I think hopefully people listening are like, oh, I think that's why Johnny likes Mary. Right? Like you're thinking, oh, I think that's why this kid likes this person. Because this
Mm-hmm.
person is chill in the sense that it doesn't have to be done her way. And she
Yeah.
actually gets more out of this kid than anyone else. And we
Yep.
know educators that do that. We know the teachers that do that. We know babysitters that can get your kids to do stuff that
Mm-hmm.
you can't get them to do. I mean, so I think that when you really think about who does your child choose to be around and who do they um, actually function higher level with, it's
Mm-hmm.
probably people who are less stressed about the outcome and more about show me how your brain works. How would you do this? And because that gives so much freedom for them.
Absolutely. I think what you're speaking about is that idea of connection over compliance and
Hmm.
teachers who are looking to build that relationship with their students. That makes me think of my 12-year-old and one teacher in particular that they have really bonded with. They shared last year, I believe, with this teacher that they have a diagnosis of ADHD. And he was like, oh, me too. And it was just so casual and so chill. And the way that he approaches his instruction is that same way, where this is our goal. It's very universal design for learning. You
Hmm.
can draw on a poster to show me what you know, or you can write in a Google Doc. You pick, or whatever the choices are. And he goes out of his way to greet her every day, to check in. How are you doing? What's new? In the morning that she one time forgot to take her ADHD medication, she went up to him and because they already had that relationship established, she said to him, "Hey, you might see that I'm not participating as much, or that I look a little bit tired. I just want you to know, I realized on the way to school, I forgot to take my medicine." And he's like, "Oh, that happens to me too." And just that moment of connection has built this relationship where he is a safe person for her to go to now. If she gets overloaded or needs to talk to someone at school, she knows she can always go to him.
Yeah.
That's an awesome example of connection. And it's actually also something about your child that she's saying that and she's advocating for herself. And she obviously has learned about neurodiversity, right? And she's learned about what her ADHD is and different things. And I was actually speaking to someone yesterday who grew up with different special education services. And she said, a lot of my friends didn't even learn about our own disabilities and just how sad that was for her. And so I think it says a lot for your daughter to say, "Hey, I have this new diagnosis."
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think from the outside looking in, we might tell kids, well, just tell your teacher that you need to do this, or just tell your teacher this. And what you have to realize is that for us, that makes complete sense. But for them, it's like, I don't have that. I don't trust this person yet. I can't talk that way to this person yet. And so it's giving them the choice around who is a safe person that you could let know that you didn't take your meds today. It's like
Absolutely.
instead of saying, tell the teacher this, tell the para that, it's you, again, you give them a choice of who would you like to tell. Maybe it's a school nurse. Maybe it's, somebody else, but it's the lady at the crosswalk that does the stop sign today. And then you've got a little note to pass, hey, let Mr. Johnson know that. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I think we can simplify that, oh, we're going to teach self-advocacy and say, this is what that looks like. But it actually, there's a lot more to self-advocacy because it's a vulnerable state. And so you have to have built rapport already. And if that's not there, then it's never going to happen.
Exactly. And the part that you said about having built that rapport already is key there, because you can't build the relationship in that quick moment to tell them then
No.
about your medication. It has to
Yeah.
already be there.
Right. Right.
So how did you support your kids with that, like learning about themselves and neurodiversity and all of that? Besides your job just happens to be something that is you're probably already talking about that no matter who your kids are.
Yeah, I think actually that's a big part of it is they know what I do for work, and we have this extremely amazing relationship built already. And so as I'm interested about in something and learning about something, I share it in the same way they share their interests. So it started that way. And then I also am strategic about certain things. So for example, I suspected that one of my children was autistic. And so I started following autistic adults on social media to see what their experiences were like so that I could, see maybe where my future was headed in parenting a child who is autistic. And I knew that my child liked to sometimes pop over my shoulder and see what I was looking at on social media. And so I intentionally one day was looking at some of these accounts that I follow of autistic adults. And then my child came over and was like, "Hey, what are you looking at?" And I showed them those videos. And it happened to be one that was like, I knew I was autistic because, and these different reasons. And so then my kiddo saw this video and was like, "Oh, I do that. I do that. I do that." And then that's when they first realized that they might be autistic as well. So it's strategic, instances like that. It's being immersed with someone like me who this is one of my special interests and passions. And then also when I go to different conferences, because of some of my kids' special needs and their separation anxiety that they often come along with me. And being at those conferences and in those experiences has introduced them to this world in a very meaningful, powerful way. Just being around people with disabilities, people using communication devices, people signing to each other at a restaurant. And you can't make that type of learning happen. It happens naturally, and more so when you're in a situation like a conference with people with disabilities.
That is true. Or classrooms that are inclusive.
What's so great is this gen is not going to have to unlearn so much of what we learned, right?
True.
So inclusion does some of that, and then vocabulary and strategy does the rest of that. But I mean, we as adults um, were learning about autism, right? And so we had to unlearn biases and unlearn thoughts about maybe it was the parenting style, you know what I mean? And unlearn all the judgment that comes around when an adult observes a child that is not regulated. And so I'm excited to see with this generation that is understanding all of this from the get-go. They didn't ever not know. And where we get there, how far we can go now with all people instead of the rich get richer, meaning the neurotypical continue to rule because most of the world is set up that way. And then what if it's not? What if we set it up where everyone thrives? And I am excited.
I love that. Thinking about that gets me excited too. And it makes me think about something that happened recently at a conference that we were at in January. My parents came with me to help watch my kids because my husband was unavailable. And they were out at the pool swimming. And my daughter saw a little boy, and he was flapping his arms and gesturing and acting in a way that was a little bit less typical, quote unquote. And my mom said something to my daughter like, "Oh, that kid's kind of weird," just in passing. And my daughter stopped her and said, "Actually, I'm pretty sure he has a disability. He's not weird. He's different. Look, I think that's his communication device over there. He's probably autistic." And she just moved on. That was like the end of the interaction. So there's Gen Alpha teaching the older folk about what is neurodiversity just in these like simple passing moments.
Exactly.
That kind of gave me goosebumps. I love that.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, if you could plant one idea in every listener's mind about neurodiversity, what would it be?
Oh, I love that you use the word plant because that makes me think of a garden. And some of you all may have heard this metaphor before, but when a plant struggles, we don't blame that plant, right? We change the environment that it's in. We change the soil, we water it, we make sure it gets the right amount of light. And in the same way, neurodiversity is not a problem to solve. Being neurodivergent is not a problem to solve. It is a reality to understand and really a strength that you can design for. When we stop trying to fix the child or the learner or the person, and we examine the environment, which could be the instruction, the supports, the home environment, everything shifts, and inclusion becomes less about access to a seat in the room and more about access to participation and voice and belonging. Neurodivergent people aren't just broken individuals and broken versions of a norm. They're fully valid ways of being human. And our responsibility as educators and clinicians and parents and system leaders is not to fix, but to instead build environments that are flexible enough to hold everybody.
Love that analogy. I'm going to think about that, the plant and changing the environment or inspecting the environment, right? To start with observing. I love that, Sarah.
So tell us what's going on now. What are you looking forward to? What's your next horizon here?
Yeah. there are a lot of things on the horizon. It's always hard to think of just one, but along the lines of neurodiversity, I will say that we have an upcoming book study through Special Ed Tech Center that is all about neurodiversity affirming schools. And so I'm really excited to lead that book study and to continue to spread the word about neurodiversity affirming supports. I'm also working on a digital project that's called an Exploratorium, which is an accessible visual model classroom where folks can click on different items that are in this inclusive model classroom and learn about what different tools or strategies are as they relate to inclusive design and inclusive education. And so I'm really excited about that project because it is taking information that we might already have in many different websites, and through lots of articles and reading, we can consume that information. But through this digital exploratorium, people can access information in a more visual way. And so I'm really excited about that. And then on a personal note, I am really excited to share a group that I recently joined, and it's called Mothers Together. And it was founded by a woman named Megan, and she has a podcast called On the Hard Days. And I actually just found her through Instagram. She had several reels that she was posting about how it's hard to be a parent of neurodiverse children. And she just did a series of different reels that were like speaking to people like me. And isn't it hard when your child does this? Just different pain points that not every parent experiences. And I felt very validated and very seen. And so when she opened her doors to this group, which she does, I think, 4 times a year, I went to her free open house and checked it out and absolutely loved it. And so she basically puts you into these groups that she calls pod squads, where you find other parents of neurodivergent children and you connect and just talk about your day-to-day life with them asynchronously over video. And even though our children are all different diagnoses, we connect through that idea that our kids are neurodivergent. And so let's say it's a Monday morning. It's not like, oh, how was your weekend? Did you have a great weekend? Was it so fun? It's like, did you survive the weekend? Things like that that are just relatable and really help me feel seen. So I'm really excited to continue to spread the word about that as well. So other parents can find their community where they have people that they can connect with. Her podcast is called On the Hard Days, and her group is called Mothers Together.
Okay.
I love that. And I love that too, because you need to find your people, right? And that you can do it asynchronously. So you might not come back to it for a week or a day or whatever, or you might be on it like all day, one day. But also that like it might not be your best friend or your partner or something that you want to share this with, right? Sometimes someone that's a little more removed is helpful.
Exactly. And there is information related to different specific topics, so if you want to learn more about things from an educational perspective, there are resources that are curated for that as well. But a lot of it really is just validation and connection, which we all need. We talked earlier about how it's hard to be a parent and to do these things. And then this is a space where I feel like I can share the hard, and oftentimes they don't have an answer. They'll just listen and be like, yeah, that stinks. That sounds really hard. And that's all I needed in that moment.
In the Special Ed Tech Center space, we have a parent meeting that's once a month. And it was a month or two ago where we were talking about relationships. And what you're talking about right now makes me think, as you're doing all this, what might sound to people as really creative parenting, especially if you came from do this, do that, here's your chore list, unless you have a fever or stomach ache, you're going to school, like all the rules that we had that were just black and white. How did you and your husband get on the same page with this?
I'm laughing because we're not.
Okay.
Some days we are.
And I know this is a personal question, but I wonder if people need to hear that these are the things that these were the, non-negotiables Like this is moving forward parenting. These are the non-negotiables, and the rest of it we're still learning, probably,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. And this is something that actually we do talk about in my pod squad through Mothers Together quite a bit, is because spouses aren't always on the same page with us. And from day one, my husband has recognized that I have more knowledge about child development and certain things than he does. And he has a very different skill set that he brings to our family. And so he's let me, kind of take the lead on some of the research around how we want to parent and all that. But he does default to more of an authoritative parenting style, especially when he's triggered. He gets very easily dysregulated. And so in that moment, I try to encourage him to take a break, and then I will step in, and I often am helping co-regulate both, right? But what has happened over time is that he has seen how the kids react to the way that I parent, and he has seen that it works. And so while I'd say some days are still really tricky for him to use declarative language or to, honor this kind of low demand parenting style, on other days, he is more readily able to do that too.
But that's real life, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's real life, and all of us. Like some days we're on our A game as parents. And then other days we are just, it's the B team, it's the bench. It's really, it's participation goal, medal.
Totally.
Because it's just like you were not crushing, but you finished the race. You know what I'm saying? Like you got to the bedtime. But
But we didn't get to the Olympics.
no. But I just think that people need to hear, like, even as much as and you apply, there are still really hard things about the other adults that are around your children, and getting them on board, so to speak, with a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, absolutely. We had some challenges around like getting certain diagnoses. Some diagnoses are more accepted by society at this point as we shift towards understanding this more, and others still aren't. And so he had a very different understanding of autism to begin with. He's a physician, so he has that medical background and focuses more on deficits and, the medical model of disability, where I come from the social model of disability. So we have had to kind of navigate that and talk about it. But again, over time, he has seen what works with our family, and we apply that strengths-based language to what we do as a family too. So how can we, capitalize on our family strengths? We are a family of ADHDers. We get passionately interested in certain things, and what can we all do together to support our strengths as a family?
I want like a plaque in the bathroom or something that says, where can I give choices or something like that. That just like when people walk away for a moment, sometimes they go to the bathroom, and then it's like, what could just, flip a switch a little bit in an intense moment.
Totally.
Of course, you'd have to have one on both walls, because some are sitting, some are standing. Yeah.
Sarah, you've given us so many great strategies. I can't even list them all, but just in this latest conversation about kind of the idea of like modeling the behavior that you're expecting, right? And how people can watch that and it catches on. I mean, that's great for personal, parents listening, but also in classrooms. If you feel like, gosh, how is this working? Is this happening? It may be these little things that are building up, and these little strategies that you're doing or someone else in your classroom is doing that you start to see. And the idea of co-regulation, declarative language. There's so many things for us and for listeners to go out and learn about now. So
consider.
Yeah, appreciate all of that, and appreciate your just your honest experiences with your family.
Yeah.
I know that's not easy to always open up about personal experiences, but it's so helpful to hear. So thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
The contents of this podcast were developed under contract with the Washington Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. U.S. Department of Education, and administered by Central Washington University. However, those contents did not necessarily represent the policy of the OSPI and CWU, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal and state government.